Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this year's 2020 Opioid Muskegon Summit. My name is Joe Whalen and I'm the chair with the Opioid Task Force, which is part of the Drug-Free Coalition of Muskegon County. Whether you are at one of our viewing sites or joining us virtually, we thank you for joining us. This year, obviously, it looks a little different because of COVID, and we have put together a presentation with a combination of stories and interviews around criminal justice, as well as how COVID-19 has impacted the opioid epidemic overall, and specifically here in Muskegon County. So we hope that you enjoy the presentation, that you find it informative, that you find at the end of the day hope, and if you're able to join in discussion at the sites afterwards, we encourage you to do so with the staff and the recovery coaches that are at each location. So on that note, thank you for joining us, and here we go.
Hi, my name's Ryan. I work with Grand Rapids Red Project. We're a nonprofit organization that main focus was for HIV and Hep C testing, but another huge role that began in 2000, I believe, and publicly in 2015 was harm reduction with the syringe exchange program. That actually played a huge role in my life. My addiction took me to a place that I had never imagined I was going to be getting to. I had went down the road of partying and hanging in with the cliques and all that, and I thought I was in control, and before I knew it, it had completely taken control of my life. It was no longer a choice. It was, okay, I have to do this or else I'm not going to be happy today. I'm not going to be able to function today. And when that had taken place, I had changed completely. My personality, things I would do were things the old Ryan would never had done, and the people around me really started to begin to notice this. And at that point is when isolation kicked in. When isolation kicked in and being by yourself constantly and feeling ashamed and just all around feeling like you don't belong anywhere, it hurt, it fed into my addiction, and it caused me to go deeper. And within going deeper, I began injection use. And when injection use had occurred and I continued going down that path, it really took things for a turn to the worse. I thought it had already gotten as bad as it could, and I was taken by surprise that it wasn't. So when this happened, it took about 6 months of me buying syringes from wherever I could find them. Pharmacies were getting stricter on it, and you'd go in and you know that they're looking at me and they're not thinking, okay, like this person is getting it for medical purposes. So there was so much judgment, and that's kind of really where Red Project came in when I found out about them. And I was able to start up at their program, CleanWorks. So the CleanWorks program was amazing. I mean, I was told, hey, you can go to this place and they will give you safer injection supplies. And they're non-judgmental and they're really cool people. But when I got there, I mean, I was thinking, you know, they're gonna give me supplies and they're gonna act like they're not judging me, and you know, I'm just gonna scurry in there and scurry out like I always have. And I was met with this warm, loving, non-judgmental aura in the room. As soon as I walked in, you know, I knew that I could tell the person what was really going on inside my head, and it wasn't gonna be like, oh, well, we can't be around that, and cast it out and further into isolation. And that's when things really started to change for me mentally. Things that hadn't occurred before started occurring, such as thinking about possibly getting into treatment. You know, that thought had never crossed my mind before. At that point, The person that was running the program in Muskegon had asked me if I had thought about rehab, which was kind of ironic because I was literally just thinking about it, but hadn't made any calls or had any serious thought about it. You know, it was just in the back of my head. And she gave me that little gentle push. And after that, I had gone to treatment 3 different times. I had relapsed 12 times, so it wasn't pretty. There was a lot of ups and downs, thinking that this was going to be the time, but it wasn't. But for me, it all happened in the time that it was supposed to happen. Once I got to the point where it finally took, life for me was a drastic change. It was a really big adjustment, but staying in touch with Red Project and CleanWorks with the harm reduction, you know, it wasn't like it stopped when I got better. They were still there for moral support, checking in on me, making sure that, you know, I knew that if I needed them, that they were there. But I had also found a new family. Fresh Coast was a huge part in my recovery as well, and I'd really like to give them a thanks. And since then, my life has just gone from 0 to 100. Today I'm actually married. I'm an awesome dad, so they tell me, which is awesome. And I work full-time for the Grand Rapids Red Project, as I had said. I'm a recovery coach, and I run the syringe exchange program in Muskegon. And on top of that, I get to help people every day, and that makes everything I went through worth it.
So I'm the Muskegon County Medical Examiner, but I'm not just the medical examiner for Muskegon County. I'm the medical examiner for 12 different counties in Michigan. Most of them are in the southwest part of the state, but then it skips up. We have Muskegon, Mason, Osceola, Grand Traverse, Leelanau. So that's what I do. I'm also the chair of the pathology department at the Western Michigan University Homer Stryker MD School of Medicine. So the medical examiner program is part of that department that we have, and we do a lot of things there where we're teaching medical students, we're doing research. We have a lot of services that we offer in the pathology department. But a big chunk of it is this work as being the medical examiner.
Wow, that sounds like it keeps you busy.
It's very busy. It is very busy, yes.
Can you explain your role as a medical examiner here in Muskegon County?
Sure. So I've been the Muskegon County Medical Examiner since 2000. So we're over 20 years now that I've been doing this. And what happens are certain types of deaths get reported to our office. Not every death is reported to us, but you can kind of lump them into deaths that are sudden, unexpected, oftentimes the deaths that are outside of a healthcare facility. Those are the types of deaths that get reported to us. People oftentimes think of murders and homicides, and yes, those do get reported. Fortunately, that's a very small percentage of the deaths that are reported to us. But the death is reported. Once it's reported, we have investigators that are right here in Muskegon County that respond to where the death occurred and where the decedent is, where the person who passed away is. They respond there. They should be there generally within an hour, and they do an investigation. And with that investigation and with that information, a decision is made about whether we need to do more. Do we need to do a postmortem examination? And if that needs to happen, then the decedent is brought to our facility in Kalamazoo. The exam is done, and then as soon as it's done, which is typically the following day, they are returned back here to Kalamazoo, to whichever funeral home that the family has selected.
So how do you determine the cause of death?
So the cause of death, and I'll just start by clarifying what that means, what cause of death is. And sometimes we get things like cause of death and manner of death, those things get mixed up. So the cause of death is the underlying kind of condition that resulted in someone's death. It's either the injury or the disease that resulted in the death. So that might be lung cancer, it could be a myocardial infarct due to coronary artery disease. It could be a cerebral infarct from hypertension. Whatever that is, there's hundreds of different causes. It might also be, since we're talking about deaths related to opioids and other drugs, it may also be a mixed drug intoxication or a drug intoxication, the toxic effects of whatever drug it is that caused the death. So those are the causes of death. The manner of death, just so everybody, getting everybody on their same page, is most deaths are natural, but in Michigan we're limited on the death certificate to 5 different manners, and that would be a natural, an accident, suicide, homicide, or in some cases we classify them as indeterminate, meaning even though we've done our full investigation, we have everything available, we don't know, we can't tell if it's an accident or a suicide, for example, okay? So that's the cause and manner. How we determine this, the cause of death, and actually both of those factors, is that we start with that scene investigation, okay? And I think some people think that, well, just somebody orders an autopsy and the person comes that needs the, that's going to have an autopsy done on them comes, and we do that, and then all the answers are there. But so much of the answer comes from that scene investigation, like where were they found dead? What were they doing? What was the history? What's their medical history? Do they have a history of drug misuse or drug abuse? And so we gather all of that information, and were they found out in the woods? Were they found dead in their own bed? I mean, all those things might play into what we do at the postmortem examination. In many cases, we need to do a postmortem examination. Oftentimes, especially if it's a drug-related death, we'll do a full autopsy on that. And we take all of that information then from the scene, from their medical history, from toxicology testing, from the autopsy, looking at things under the microscope. We put all of that together and make a determination about what caused the death, okay? Now, let's say somebody dies at home and they knew that they had pancreatic cancer, but they didn't want to seek treatment for it, and so they die without medical attendance. We might not autopsy that. That would be one that you say, look, it's pretty apparent what happened here, and there's no suspicion of anything unusual that's occurred. The family's around, everything seems fine. So we might not always autopsy deaths, all right, autopsy cases. But in many cases, especially in drug-related deaths, we do a complete investigation plus a complete autopsy, and we put everything together to come up with those answers. So that's pretty much how it goes. In drug-related deaths, we do things, I don't want to say differently, but we really have a real focus on findings at the scene, and that is like what was there drug paraphernalia present? Are we finding needles or evidence that maybe something had been snorted? So we look for that specifically. We also look at the history, and it's so frequent, it's almost unheard of that we are investigating a death related to opioids and other drugs where the family had no idea. I mean, oftentimes the family, may think that their loved one, their family member had stopped using, maybe months ago. Sometimes even they didn't think they'd used for years, but then once everything's done and the toxicology results are all back, we find out that they were using again. And they used too much, or the drugs that they thought they were getting are different. And they got, they may have thought they were getting heroin, but instead they got something with a very potent fentanyl in it, and resulted in their death. So we do some extra things, look for some special things with drug-related deaths in order to determine the cause of death.
Can you explain more, I guess, on what trends you're seeing in Muskegon County in relation to drug-related deaths?
Sure. The trends that we're seeing in Muskegon County are actually pretty disturbing. We were seeing in 2018, and I have actually in front of me here, but we did a comparison of the first 6 months of 2018, the first 6 months of 2019, and the first 6 months of 2020. So we took those 3 years and compared them and said, how are we doing? Well, in 2018, the first 6 months, we had 30 deaths due to drugs, okay? And 24 of those were accidents. 5 were suicides, and one of them was classified as indeterminate, meaning we really couldn't tell was it an accident or a suicide. There were maybe some indicators for could have been either one. But 24 accidental drugs, drug-related deaths, 30 altogether. In 2019, we kind of saw the number dropping a little bit. We had gone from 30 to 24 in that first 6 months. And there were still 21 accidents, but the number overall, the whole number was coming down. So we were kind of maybe cautiously optimistic that there was some progress being made. In 2020, the numbers are way up. And we saw in the first 6 months of 2020 that there were 36. So we've gone from 24 last year to 36 this year, and that's just for the first 6 months. And 34 of those were accidental deaths. Most of these are probably the most common drug that we're seeing is fentanyl. And when we say fentanyl, sometimes it's one of these, we call it a fentanyl analog. They're sort of at their core, they're fentanyl, but then they put another chain on it, and it might be called acetylfentanyl or another type of fentanyl. So we're seeing a lot of that. In fact, out of the 36 deaths that occurred the first 6 months in 2020, 28 of them had fentanyl in them. Wow. And only 8 of them had heroin. And I think what happens is, I mean, I do know that people think that they're buying heroin. This is what I believe. They go and they say they're trying to buy heroin, or that's what their intent is, and they end up with the fentanyl because it acts pretty much the same way. It's just much more potent. And so I think like that's part of a kind of a dangerous thing that's happening.
Do you see any other cases where fentanyl is involved outside of heroin?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we do see, we see fentanyl-related deaths without heroin there. In fact, that, we oftentimes see a blend of drugs. We see more than one. So whether the fentanyl is getting cut with heroin or vice versa, you're seeing both of them in there. So I don't know. They're different manufacturing process. So at some point they're being brought together and mixed and sold that way. But we're definitely seeing that.
So do you believe that there's any drug-related trends in particular for Muskegon County that we should be focusing on with one substance versus another?
We're seeing the biggest rise in opioids. We see some methamphetamine. So if we look at those blocks of 6 months again, so in 2018 there were 3 out of the 30 deaths that had methamphetamine, and in 2019 there were 2. In 2020 there are 6. But the biggest number, the biggest number by far are the opioids. The heroin and the fentanyl are the 2 biggest ones. And so I think like that, if you're trying to really focus on where the trends are and what we're seeing, that seems to be it. I don't know why it's on the increase again. I mean, you personally would, you may have a better idea just from the work that you do on why this is happening. It's the opioid epidemic that is crashing headfirst into the pandemic. And I have to think that those 2 are somehow interrelated, but I don't know why or how. I don't know if it's the high unemployment rate. I don't know if it's stimulus checks. I don't know if it's not being able to go out. I don't know what it is, but it's clear that it's there. And so I would think like that would be an area that really could use significant attention to try and bring those numbers down.
Yeah, and I like how you addressed that while we're in a pandemic, this epidemic with opioids is still on the rise and still needs to be addressed during this time.
And we really felt like even in our other counties with the other 12 counties, there seemed to be between 17, 18, and 19, there seemed to be like, it felt like we were turning the corner, like things were turning around. I mean, it was still way too high. But things were improving, and then when the pandemic hit, it's just taken off again. And so I'm not sure how or why or even how to fix the problem, because that's just so far from my area of expertise. But I am willing to wave the flag and say we have a problem here, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, and like you said, like I think it can be due to a lot of various factors during this time. So.
Right, yeah, and I don't think there's any one, like, well, it's because of unemployment rates or it's because of whatever. I mean, I think it's just, there's probably a whole list of different reasons why this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Joyce, I appreciate your time that you took to sit down and have a conversation with us to educate us more on what you do, and we appreciate your work here in Muskegon County.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. We're always looking for ways to make sure people know what we're finding and what we're seeing, and anything we can do to provide that information or data to help address the problem, we're happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melvin Dunbar, and I'm coming to just give you a little bit about what happened to me during my lifetime. And one of the things was getting hooked on drugs, but when you leave home at 18 and hit the streets for the first time in your life, end up in a whole different country all by yourself, you do a lot of different things. So peer pressure will get you started. Being alone will get you started. And just the curiosity of what it feels like will get you started. All that is no reason to destroy your life. I went to the rehab. They scheduled me for 30 days in the hospital. I was going to do a halfway house for 30 days. And I was going to do 30 days making the meetings when I came back to Muskegon. And when I went to the rehab, I did 7 days in the hospital. I did 7 days in the halfway house. And when I came home, I did 7 days of meetings, and I went back to work. And I worked from then up until I retired in 2011, and today I am a chaplain that is work through GCI. I also work with deJong at Loving Grace Healing Center, and we consult people. We're not counselors, we're consultants. So we do consult with people and to try to help them find their way to Jesus today. And I just am so thankful for what God has done for me, because I know it was His touch that said, "You're next." And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I do know what it means today. Being sober, being in your right mind is the best thing anyone can do for themselves, because of the fact that mind-altering substance alters your mind, and you will never, ever know who you are, because you are being someone else. It's not you. As I tell everyone today, my best day of getting high cannot even compare to my worst day of being sober. Well, today I am a better husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, brother, uncle, completely new man. My nephews and nieces used to see me coming and run the other way. Now they run to me. I'm no longer a follower, but a leader. I am leaving a family legacy that I am very proud of.
So my name is Debbie, and this is my husband John and my daughter Abella, and our son Zach is not here tonight because he had football practice. So about 14 years ago, we actually had 3 kids that we had adopted within a year's time. Actually, we started off foster parenting because one child was 12 years old and she was removed from her home because of alcohol. And then within a few months later, we got Zach. And we saw on the news that he was in a meth house. and he was 18 months old. And when we got him, he had so much anger and issues with that. And then less than 3 months later, here comes Abella, born and addicted to OxyContin, which she tested positive for in her system. So, and then their younger sister came and tested positive for 7 types of drugs. So within a year's time, we had 4 children that were devastated by the use of drugs from their parents.
Yeah, I can remember that first couple of years, and he just screamed and screamed, and I can remember my wife just holding him, and just through the years, it's just a constant struggle with him, and all the way up to today. Now he's 16, so we still struggle, but we still make it. Now, and today, our son is 16 years old, and he's now into football. Now he's got his own job, and we're just so proud of what he is doing in his life.
And I think it's really helped that Zach has had things outside of himself. I think he realizes that the things we were teaching him are out of love and not out of trying to take him from his parents. All of these years, he has thought we took him from his mom and his dad. It is absolutely amazing to see how many kids are out there that are devastated from this happening to them with addiction. They have been separated from their parents. I've seen it in my kids' friends and places that I go in our community. Even the teachers have spoken about knowing our kids as parents, and it's sad. They've had this label carry them all the way from before they went to school.
My whole life I've struggled with lack of focus and anger and just like madness around everyone in my life. I love going to church because it just helps me like calm, or riding my horse or dancing. It's like a stress relief. I've thought a lot about what my life would be like if I didn't get adopted, and it's like really tough for me because I'm like, well, would life be better there? Would it be better here? So it's really good where I got it. I'm really happy.
So what has helped us is the Celebrate Recovery group, and that we have been attending for the last couple of years now, and it helped us extremely well through these situations, and I mean situations.
And it's actually a 12-step program that allows us to work and be around people that have gone through addictions, and we can better understand it to help our children because they're already facing the temptation of having it in their system physically. They now, if they ever try it firsthand, one time, their body remembers the effects and the feeling of that drug because they were born with it in their system. The other thing that has helped is we've had counseling. Our kids have been in counseling for years, and Love and Grace Healing Centers has helped us a lot. It's a community program, so we don't have to pay for it, and that helps us tremendously because of the counseling that we pay for can cost a lot. But these free programs like Celebrate Recovery and Love and Grace help a lot.
You know, if we go back 10 years, how was the whole drug crisis with what we're seeing going on now? Obviously, it was brand new probably to a lot of agencies and not knowing how to handle it, because if you go back a number of years, crack was really the only thing that was around, and here comes heroin, then here comes prescription drugs, and so it's evolved into something totally different than 20 years ago. On the treatment side, how has the change taken place, and how agencies and law enforcement deal with these situations here?
Well, first and foremost, Nate, thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It's always a pleasure. And, you know, I think to start answering your question, I think we've seen certainly a shift in mentality. Mm-hmm. You know, you go back, and I can remember growing up even, and I think it was Ronald Reagan or George Bush that was in the Oval Office when they announced the war on drugs, and he held up that kilo of cocaine and said, "We just bought this, you know, a block from the White House, and now we're the fight is on." Yeah. And so that the early on, when we talk about 15, 20 years ago, the mentality was, hey, look, the way that we solve this problem is that we just start hitting everybody and we hit them hard. And that's where you saw the mandatory minimums on a lot of drug crimes. And it didn't matter if you were an addict, it didn't matter if you were a mule, you were treated just as though you were the cartel boss.
Right.
And so as my career began in '99, that was kind of the mentality. I remember handling cases with those mandatory minimums and being on the drug team and talking to local dealers that had been busted and talking to them about the 5 and 10 year mandatories and how they could work their way out of that. And then slowly as my career started to advance in that early 2000, mid 2000 range, we saw a shift that wasn't necessarily the answer. Now, I don't think we really started focusing in on treatment a whole lot, but I think law enforcement, or at least legislature, was telling law enforcement that the mandatory minimums, locking up the addicts, wasn't the solution because the drugs were still flowing. People were still getting pretty wealthy off of selling the poison in our neighborhoods, and so we had to start moving, and shifting a little bit in the law enforcement community. And we talk about now the introduction of heroin over the last 5 years. And where that was a drug of the 70s, that all of a sudden that became the drug of the mid 2000s or in the late 2000s. And so I think what you saw in the law enforcement community is a change in mindset in this respect, that now we recognize that we can't arrest our way out of that problem. We can't lock up people and fix that problem. We actually have to work on what you mentioned, and what I believe in is the demand side, which is the people that are using, because usually those are the ones that get wrapped up in the criminal justice system. And so I think you're seeing a difference now in the law enforcement community of not necessarily a focus for them on treatment, but an understanding and a recognition that treatment is one of the better options we have for crime prevention or substance abuse prevention, which leads to crime prevention in communities. And I think we're seeing some success there in the sense that some of the local groups that we have that have law enforcement on their boards, the Ally group, which is kind of alcohol related, and then the AMP group, which is more controlled substance related, and law enforcement being a part of that. Law enforcement having better communication with the medical providers, the physicians here in town, and understanding and being a part of those conversations as it relates to how controlled substances are actually dispensed to those who are getting them with legal prescriptions. And so I really think, even though law enforcement, at least on the front end lines, isn't necessarily playing a huge role in treatment, I think in today's day, you're seeing a much better understanding and recognition of how important treatment is, because the addict that we treat is the addict that they don't deal with back on the streets. I mean, if things are going correctly, the addict that we treat is not the same. You're not going to see that person, committing that retail fraud or breaking into that building or stealing or whatever the case is. And so, and that's why I think we see great support from law enforcement as it relates to our treatment courts. We have strong support from law enforcement and our recovery court and our veterans treatment court that are dealing with individuals with substance abuse issues. And again, whatever makes it easier for law enforcement on the streets, where we're not seeing the same person 5 times, 6 times, and we're breaking that cycle, a lot of times that generational cycle. That to me is proactive crime prevention in this arena.
Do you see an overall, in our community here in Muskegon County, a mind shift on how we need to approach this particular epidemic?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in a lot of the different discussions that I've had, and that's been with the community groups, that's been sitting down with Mercy Health and really trying to spearhead what I think is an opportunity for us to create a gold standard, if you will, as it relates to substance abuse treatment center. I really think that there is definitely a shift in mindset that, the person who is unfortunately trapped in that addiction is not our enemy. In fact, that's the person that we need to reach a hand down and help. And to me, from the prosecution side, I see that almost on a daily basis. And recognize, again, personally recognize that those are the folks that we really need to spend a lot of time and attention and some effort on. Because again, a majority of the crimes that are committed usually have some sort of tie back to some sort of substance abuse issue, which is sad. And so again, if we go to the root cause, when you kill a weed, you go to the root. You don't lop off the top of the weed. You go to the root of the weed to kill it. And so, from my I guess experience, being able to sit at the table with all these different stakeholders that I wouldn't necessarily get involved with, just because we're not working in the same circles normally. But now understanding where the common goal is. Muskegon County is blessed with people that can sit around a table and really work towards a resolution, and I've seen it time and time again.
If we go back to the root problem, just here in Muskegon County, just from your own experience, conversations, talking, how do you see the real issue behind the byproduct, the addiction, where things are at? What's the real root issue here?
Boy, I think there are many causes. Sometimes it's a traumatic event or traumatic events during a person's lifetime. And substance use becomes the coping mechanism. It could be that it's just a learned behavior because they grew up in that environment, and that's normal to them because that's what they grew up with, and so it just seems like a natural progression that's what I need to do. Now there are certainly anecdotal success stories of people breaking away from that cycle, but those are far more few between those that are part of that. The unfortunate, to me, the whole situation is unfortunate. Whether that's an environment that you grew up in or that you were exposed to as a young person, or you've suffered some sort of abuse. A lot of times, people who suffer, whether it be physical or sexual abuse, that becomes their coping mechanism. And so, to me, those little sub areas, and unfortunately, as much as I know you and me personally would love to be able to either go back in time or be the superhero that kind of is able to pull them out of that environment or ease that trauma, we can't do that. And so we have to, again, figure out where our resources are best spent. And certainly, as we talk about this idea of how important treatment is, that is a byproduct. So it's not only just, okay, I'm going to treat you for your use of this particular substance, but I need to now understand why and treat that. And so it's a multi-level thing. But at the end of the day, if the byproduct is somebody who is probably not as whole as they once were, but are able to cope with those stressors differently than using a substance, then we win. We win. Society wins. That person wins, certainly. And to me, that's the ultimate goal. And that's where you take your money bags and you say, this is where I want to invest my money, is in a situation like that. What that magic answer is, education on the substance itself and the dangers of it and what it means, and certainly even for families that have two-parent homes, parents that are actively engaged with the people that are living there, their kids, because we could have a family and not know what each kid is doing, and that's what lends itself to problems. So it's more than just being present. It's actually being actively engaged in your kids' lives, knowing, getting them involved in extracurricular activities, knowing who their friends are, knowing what they're doing and when they're doing it. We're phone police with my teenage sons right now. There is no privacy.
They know what time it is?
There is no privacy in the Hilson household. But it's one of the things that really drives me crazy is this idea that parents sometimes think they have to be their kids' friends.
Oh, yeah.
You're the parent. You're the ones that set the boundaries. And when you set the boundaries, you make sure that when the boundaries are crossed, there's a consequence for that, accountability. So there's a lot of things that are floating around here.
What type of training has law enforcement been involved in? Because like we've talked about, we're in this new wave. This is the kind of something that we've never experienced before as a city, as a nation. So in order to stay up with what's going on, there has to be some trainings going on. For Muskegon County specifically, what are things that are happening for law enforcement to be trained in how to interact with this community?
Well, certainly local law enforcement does not have a blind eye to what's happening across the country.
Yeah.
I think the goal for us here in Muskegon County is not to be reactive, but to be proactive. And the good news is that even prior to the unrest that we're seeing now in certain parts of our country, even prior to that, even prior to going back to the real first, I'll leave Rodney King out of it for a second because that was really early in the 90s, but certainly Ferguson. I think there was a recognition here locally that we've work to do in order to make sure that we are able to do our jobs, but also maintain a bridge, if you will, between law enforcement and the community. And part of that responsibility was making sure that we understand all the community. Not just Joe Blow citizen, but also those that are suffering from some of these things that we've been talking about, whether it be mental health or substance abuse. And so probably about 2 or 3 years ago, one of our local chiefs, Roger Squires, who's the chief in Whitehall, was trained as a trainer in the mental health side of things. And so his role was then to essentially take that training as the trainer and train local law enforcement on the mental health, and how you deal with somebody who may be going through a mental health crisis or a behavioral crisis. Because, again, as history has shown, a lot of times those are the folks that end up being roughed up a little bit, or maybe even end up doing something that causes an officer to react, to use deadly force. And there are better ways to handle those situations, whether it be through de-escalation or, more importantly, having a resource like Health West and their mobile crisis team to come in and kind of play the go-between between what law enforcement has to do and what's happening to that individual at that particular time. And so that has been a tremendous asset to our local law enforcement here in Muskegon County. If memory serves me correct, most of our law enforcement officers have gone through that kind of mental health training. I firmly believe that you can use some of those principles even dealing with the substance abuse aspect of that. So dealing with addicts, because all law enforcement knows, whether it's because of personal experience having dealt with that individual more than one time, or just the nature of the contact they're having or the crime that's being committed, that they're dealing with somebody with a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. And again, similar to someone having a behavioral health crisis, somebody that is wildly high on a particular substance is going to do and say things that they probably wouldn't normally say. And again, officers, their first response sometimes is to make sure they protect themselves or protect their partner. And now I think being able to recognize some of the maybe early warning signs helps prevent some of that first initial reaction, which is I'm going to protect myself more than anything else. And so I think that's why we're seeing, in particular in Muskegon County, that's why we see our law enforcement personnel being able to handle those situations differently now than maybe they would have handled it 10 or 15 years ago. I'm thankful for what our local law enforcement has learned over the last 2 or 3 years and is applying that on a daily basis, which is keeping our temperature at a manageable level.
My name is Mary. I am 34 years old. I am a recovering heroin, meth, and crack addict. I got into the drug scene actually older than most. I was 26 when I started using. I kind of drank and smoked weed in high school, but nothing crazy. I lived in St. Louis. I was born and raised in St. Louis. I was a manager at the Cheesecake Factory. My husband actually ran a bar and grill, so we had a pretty successful, stable life. I met him when I was 18. And when I was 26, I hurt my back at work and got prescribed pain pills. I was raised in an upper class family, so I went to college. I had really great opportunities in life. Nobody really ever says to themselves, I'm gonna go out and be an addict today. I definitely didn't plan on ever trying heroin. But basically, I got prescribed these opiate pain pills when I was 26 years old. Ended up taking them for 6 months and then couldn't get off. That was right around the time where they were starting to cut people off real quick, realizing that it was becoming an addictive thing. And basically, I got cut off from my prescription and realized real quick that I was in a withdrawal state. Started seeking them out on the street. Within a year of that, I basically was spending every dime I made on prescription pain pills, buying them off the street. Within 2 years, lost everything. Came to Muskegon to get clean with my in-laws. Kind of went through bouts of relapse and recovery and relapse and recovery. I had tried every recovery program out there, nothing worked. We had a little bit of an upswing where we were able to save money, get in our own place, and within 6 months, again, we lost it. At this point, went back to his parents' house, and they kind of gave us an ultimatum and said, either you get clean or we take your kids legally. So my husband, that was his breaking point. He made the decision to get clean and has been clean ever since that day. I, on the other hand, made a decision to leave. So I left him and my children to go do heroin on the streets of Muskegon Heights. I lived out of my car for about 6 months and was trafficked. So basically started messing around with drug dealers to get my next fix, and that was pretty much all it was about at that point. I really lost contact with him. I didn't talk to my kids. I wasn't working. I spent my entire day chasing my next fix. I didn't really actually realize how bad I was off until I got out of it and got clean. But the last day in my addiction was with this guy that trafficked me. I basically got the crap beat out of me, arrested, and then bonded out of jail to be killed by this guy, all within a 24-hour period. I realized that I was worth way more, that it wasn't necessarily the heroin that was going to kill me, but the lifestyle, and I wanted out. And when I came out of the trafficking situation, I had just the clothes on my back, came here to Fresh Coast, and I really wanted a chance at a better life. I knew I was more than this. I knew I was better than this. I wanted to be a mom again. I wanted to be a wife again. And I wanted a shot at being able to really restore my life. So with working with the folks here with Fresh Coast, I actually got a shot at that. And here I am 21 months later, living just a fully restored life. Got my kids back. I actually remarried my husband, and working towards a career in recovery coaching so that I can really help people have a shot at a restored life as well. You know, now that I'm in on the other side of addiction and in recovery and really living a life of purpose, living a life of meaning, actually wanting to help people and seeing why I was placed on this earth. My best friends now are people that are in kingdom life and like the church, and that's who I surround myself with. And that's just, I really believe like community is everything. Who you surround yourself with is a lot of the difference in your success. Really, realistically, I would live all of that again if I could feel the way I feel every single day, fully fulfilled, fully purposeful, and just happier than I could ever even imagined I would ever be.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this year's Opioid Summit for Muskegon County. We hope you can join in conversation with the recovery coaches at each of our sites. And if you signed up for the optional Narcan training, the link for that will follow at the end of this video. We'd like to also give a very special thank you to some folks who helped put this together for this year. Deb from Love and Grace Healing Center, Megan from the Red Project, Steve from Hackley Community Care, and Jill from Public Health, who formed the team who helped put the entire event together. And also a special thank you to DJ Hilson and Dr. Joyce deJong for their participation in the interviews. So once again, thank you to these individuals as well as everybody else who helped put this year's summit together. Once again, thank you. We hope you found hope and inspiration, and feel free to reach out to any of the coaches or staff at the sites for more information or for help accessing treatment or recovery resources. Once again, thanks again, and take care.
If we arrest an addict and they spend, a few days in the county jail, they get prosecuted for whatever it is, and then they're back out on the street, well, they're still an addict. So in order to what the?
Whoa. That's the whole building.
Yeah. Something,
Check the breaker.
a tree fell or something. Well, it's been pretty windy outside.
Was it?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it's. Man, I was on a roll.
I know you were.
Yeah. Obviously your cameras are battery powered. Okay.
We were on a roll in here.
Yeah.